Okay, I think we're gonna go ahead and get started. A couple people might come in later, and that's perfect. But today we're going to do like we did last time, go over just an example, just to kind of like get everyone prepared and ready for the test. Um, I'm not as good at writing as Julie and Dr. Dorfman, so I like using Excel for my examples. Hope that's okay. So hold up. Um, can y'all see quantity supply up top? Perfect, perfect. So in this case, we're going to look at where a case where quantity supply is 100. The demands for period one is 100 minus Q. Period two is 100 minus Q2. And the storage cost is 1 plus 0.05 P1. All right. So again, going to like go through it and feel free to help each other, guide, and together we're going to get through this. So first things first, how do I figure out the storage supply? Anyone want a little hint? See if I can showcase that kind of help. Okay, so in this case, it's the quantity supply minus the demand for person one. And the way we calculate the demand for person one or period one is right here, where it's 100 minus 100, 1 minus P. And we calculated that by just reworking that equation. Any questions on that? Okay. So then once we do the simple math to it, we find that we're just left with P1. So the storage supply, which in this case we're going to call S storage, is just P1. All right. So now let's go to like supply for the period two. Or yeah, supply for the period two. So the formula for that one is given as this. So anyone want to try to help me walk through like the steps of how I calculate that?
Well, you've already got part of it because SST is P1.
Mm-hmm.
And then storage cost is A plus CPT, which I guess you have to figure out what those numbers are.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wait, we already have it.
Yep.
1 plus that 0.05 P1.
Yep. So you're saying it's just P1 plus this?
That's right.
Okay. Correct. And then if we do simple maths, we find that the supply for period two is 1 plus 1.05 P1. All right. Any questions on that one? All right. So how can we find P2? Or the price for period two, given the information that's given?
Wouldn't you add your formula for supply cost to P1 to get P2?
Anyone want to agree with them or got anything want to add to it? Okay. I think I'm seeing some head nods. All right. So yeah, it's just P1 plus 1 plus 0.05 P1. And then doing some more quick math, you're left with 1 plus 1.05 P1. Any questions on that one part? Cool. So now we got to find the D1, the demands for them. Like we know that the demand is D1 plus D2 equals 100. And we're trying to now find our stars. But quick question, why do we need D1 and D2 to equal 100? Like, what does that mean?
I'm guessing 100 is like your total quantity supplied. So you can't, like, you don't want demand to be more than what you're able to sell to people.
Mm. So if I'm a business person, then I want to like sell all of that, right? Yep, yep. Perfect. So given that, how would I set up the equation? Given that I know that S2, given that I know that demand one plus demand two has to equal 100, what would the equations be? Would I just sub in these two, reworked into the Q first, or how would I do it?
You could rework the demands so they're both equal to Q and then substitute them in.
Okay, so what would that be per se?
You'd have P1, you'd have 100 minus P1 plus 100 minus P2. And that has to be equal to 100.
Yep. Yep, yep. And then if I simplify that, what would I wind up being as far as that equation?
Is it P1 plus P2 equals 200?
Anybody else want to add to it or correct or think he's right? Want to back him up? So how did you said, so the first thing you said was this, correct?
Yeah.
And then you can rewrite this by setting, like putting all like terms to one side. So like putting all your P's or your like variables on one side and all your numerical ones on the other to make it simplified. And we do that, what do you like what would this simplify to?
Yeah, I just did the mental math wrong. So it's just P1 plus P2 equals 100.
Yep. And is there anything else that we can like, given the information that we've already previously worked out, how can we like simplify this or make this like to solve out?
You could take your supply for period 2, like the P2 that we solved at the bottom, the 1 plus 1.05 P1, and substitute that for P2 in the formula we have right now. So you'd have P1 plus 1 plus 1.05 P1 equals 100.
It's a good idea. It's a good idea. Let's see.
And then you could solve for P1, and then you could just plug that back in to find P2.
Okay. Everybody follow what he said or agree with what he said or want to add to it? See a head nod. That's good. That's good. So, yep, you set this equal and you're right. You get 100. So then, exactly like what you said, P1 plus 1 plus 1.05 P1, which is what we got right here, also has to equal 100. So then, doing some more math, this can simplify out to what?
You'd have 2.05 P1 equals 99.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So then in order to solve for P1, all I'd have to do is just divide, right? Or multiply.
Right.
Divide or multiply.
Divide.
Yep. So we get this, and saving y'all a little time, P1 star equals 48.3, which means the price for period 1 is that. Does that kind of make sense for everyone? Everybody follow? Any questions on this part thus far? Okay. And I can't see fully everybody, so feel free to speak up or talk in chat. And I got you. So now that we found P1 star, how can we find, what else can we find? Like what else can we find now? Or what's the next step?
Well, now you could plug that into your P2 equation of 1 plus 1.05 P1 and solve for P2.
You could do that. Okay. That's right. What about for like how would I solve for Q1?
You would plug your P1 back into your demand function from the beginning.
So right here.
Yeah.
All right, and roughly what should I get? Or and what actually why should I do that?
That's going to give you the quantity that you want to sell during period 1, given the price. And then you would store the remainder.
Okay. So roughly 100
It
minus.
should be like 51 point something.
So like you said, plug that back in and wind up with Q1 star equals 51.7. And like you said earlier regarding how I find P1 star, I'm glad you like got ahead. Here, you find P2 star, exactly like how you said, you plug it back into your P1 back in here, and you're left with this. Simplify even more. P2 star equals 51.7. So how could I find Q2?
Do the same thing you did for Q1, except use your P2 value.
True. So, or you could do it. What's another way of doing it? You could do it that way, but what's another way? Just to
You
kind
could
of
subtract 100 from your Q1 star.
How did you come up with that?
Because we know that our total, that D1 plus D2 equals 100. So if you've used Q1 already, then the remainder has to equal to 100 because that's all you have.
Yeah. The beauty about this is you can do it a variety of different ways, but the key thing is making sure that you can know like how each step is and how it moves. Numbers can change, and sometimes it might look weird, and it's supposed to look weird. So it's always good to know like there's a variety of different ways. I kind of like proof and check. But yeah, both of y'all are right. So like the way I kind of did it was what you said earlier, where I found D1 plus D2, and I know like we work these equations in terms of Q1 and Q2, set them equal to each other, and I know they have to equal, like you said, 100. And since we know that Q1 is 51, all I did was 100 minus Q1, keep moving forward. 100 minus 48.29, Q2 equals 48.3. So this is our functions. Are there any questions regarding this point right now before I move forward? Okay. So now we're going to do like just a quick check just to make sure that everything we're doing is fine and makes sense. So quick check is P2 minus P1 has to equal SC. Well, why? Can someone like answer that question for me? Like, why does the price for period 2 minus P1 has to equal the storage cost?
Because in order to like sell your remaining demand, your remaining supply in P2 at a profit, you have to apply the storage cost to the price that you had from the first period. So it's basically your price plus the cost you accrued during the period between P1 and P2.
Exactly. So exactly like how you said, the storage cost function is given as boom, boom. And if we plug this in, we're left with 3.4. And with P2 minus P1, we know that that's just 48 or 51.7 minus 48.3, which equals to 3.4. And this is just kind of like just a proof to make sure like all your numbers are making sense and to make sure that it all holds out, because exactly like how you're fellow cohort or colleague said. All right. Are there any questions, any other questions on this before I move forward to like the last little step or last little thing I want to show y'all? Okay, so let me see if I can stop sharing and switch. Perfect. Okay, so what I wanted to kind of like do was showcase what these numbers mean through like a mapping and showcase visual proof of how it moves. So this black line represents what given our like equations? It represents our actual like quantity supply or quantity demand function for period 1. So this is the quantity demanded, where it was 100 minus X, and this is our quantity supplied, 100. And then this point right here is the point that we calculated, 51.7, 48.3 for period 1. Okay. So now let's look at the graph for, let's recreate the graph for period 2. So for period 2, we know that the supply or the storage supply is just P1, right? So it's just an upward sloping line that's moving up. And we also know that our storage supply for period 2 is your storage supply plus everything that's included in your thing. So this is just this line right here. Notice how it's close. So they're both moving upwards, and they're both, because supply moves up, demand moves down. So now if we zoom in and analyze this point right here, we get the numbers that we calculated, 48.2 for the quantity and 51.7 for the price for period 2. And like I said, this is just kind of like a visual kind of like case to further prove how the numbers move and how they change. Are there any questions on that thus far?
So visually, that space between the green line and the red line should be your storage cost.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, because it's about 3.4 between it.
Yep. So now I want to get into like some supposes real quick. So what do you think will happen if I adjust or change up the, like what numbers would have to change if I want to say that, okay, our storage supply isn't no longer P1, it's now P1 plus 1. Like how would that change up this graph, or how would things change?
So you're saying if you changed your storage costs from P1 to P1 plus 1.
Yep.
Would that increase the amount that you would sell for Q1 and then decrease the amount that you would supply for Q2 by 1?
Pretty much. I just kind of want to just like make sure that everyone kind of understands the mindset of like, once you get the flow, it proceeds. Like it's just making sure that you get the steps such as, stop sharing and go back to the actual like Excel. The big thing is understanding the flow of how the numbers move and just the formulas. That's the hardest part. And just like how making careless like math mistakes, that even like doing this is common, but that's the overall like flow. And the big thing is to kind of like consider cases where, in this case, the demands are the same. Sometimes they're not always the same. And it's always good to kind of like just not assume and just like notice a trend. Okay. Are there any other questions? Because I think that's all I kind of wanted to go through today. So if there's any other thing, or
could you go back down to the very bottom of this page so I can get the last numbers? Thank you.
if you have questions on the homework or any other thing as well, we've got extra time if you have
Yeah.
those questions.
I just had a quick question. When is our first exam?
It is not this Friday, but next Friday.
Okay,
That's the
25th.
25th.
Okay,
Mhm.
yeah. All right, thank you.
Yeah. And so, like Julie said, we got time if y'all want to ask any questions about the homework or things like that.
Or like any other questions.
So
Yeah.
I'm guessing we're gonna have one more problem set on storage before the exam, and that's gonna be part of the exam.
I don't think you do.
Okay.
Problem set 3 is due the 2nd of October.
Okay. So like the week after next.
Yeah.